Welcome to UCC. I want to say happy Mother's Day to all women in the audience today. My name is Chris Pasek. I'm the lead pastor here at UCC. And I want to invite you back next week. Next week, we're wrapping up this series called Asking for a Friend. And it's this little series we've been doing where we're answering hard questions. And if you come next week, we've saved the best for last, because the question we're going to be wrestling with is simply this: what does God require of me? It's a great question, right? And so maybe you're just discovering your faith. Maybe you've been a Christian for a long time. Wherever you're at, I invite you back next week. Now this week, if you follow kind of our teaching schedule, we have a second church over in Wyandotte, Michigan. Normally, I just kind of bounce between the two churches every other week. So if you're following the schedule, I should be with you today. But it's Mother's Day and we're doing something really special here at UCC. See, we have a value at UCC called authenticity. And the challenge I make to every staff member at UCC, and really the church at large, is to go share your story and share it authentically. And the reason why is because there's this idea in Christianity that, hey, if you work for a church, or if you belong to a church, or if you go to church, then look, you have to kind of put on that fake face, act like life is all fine. But the reality is, and this is just my experience, is that oftentimes what brings us into church is a story. Sometimes it's a story of loss. Sometimes it's a story of aha moment at being a very low place, right? I don't know what your story is, but what I challenge every staffer is, man, be authentic with your story. Because you never know who might show up to church that might need to hear what your past is. And so today, like I said, it's a special day for us. We're kind of going to let you hear from one of our staffers that's a brand new mom. Now again, before you tune out, especially if you're a lady in the room or a guy, okay, but a lady in the room that can't have kids. Listen, first, my heart goes out to you, okay? Like my sister, she adopted 2 kids, so my nieces, all adoption. Okay, so I understand the hurt. I understand that sometimes you might miss Mother's Day. Okay, but I want to introduce you to Tracy Malloy. Tracy Malloy is our small groups director at UCC, and she is going to come share her journey of her infertility on Mother's Day. And what we're going to learn, I'm telling you, it's going to be so special, is that God has a journey for you, bathed in hope, full of faith. And so with that, I want you to sit back as we have recorded Tracy's story, but I want you guys to know that this is the message that God has you to hear, one full of hope. Here is Tracy Malloy.
Well, good morning, church. I would like to wish everybody an unhappy Mother's Day. Yes, you heard that right. That was me 1 year ago today. Last year on Mother's Day, it was the very first time in my life that I had intentionally planned not to be at church because I couldn't handle another Mother's Day message, and I couldn't bear to watch another child dedication because of how badly in my heart I wanted to be a mom. And it all started for us in 2017. I was 32 years old at the time, my husband 31, and we were on an all-inclusive vacation to Cancun, Mexico. Now, if you've ever been on one of these trips, you know it is paradise, right? You are completely carefree, you're free to dream. And so for the very first time as a married couple, my husband and I were dreaming about our future family. And we had decided by the end of that trip that we were ready to start a family. And so in my excitement, on the plane ride home, I'm already starting my Pinterest boards, right? I'm planning my baby shower. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to announce it to my husband. Am I going to do one of those cute photo shoots, or am I going to get a pizza box? And he opens it up and it says, due date, special delivery date, and the due date of the baby. But what I did is when I got home, we had a Scrabble board in the basement. So I went and grabbed the board and I glued the letters, "You're going to be a daddy," on the board because we played Scrabble a lot at that time. And our next trip, which was just a couple weeks later to Texas, there is a store that is blessed by the hand of God. It is called Ross's. So if you've ever been down south, you know what I'm talking about. There's actually one coming down river. So husbands, you might want to freeze your wife's credit cards. That's just free advice. But I went to the store Ross's and I bought so many maternity clothes on that trip. I actually had to buy a carry-on bag to bring them home in. And the funny thing is, when you make plans, you expect them to happen on your times table. But what I didn't know, what I failed to anticipate, is that bin of maternity clothes and that Scrabble board was going to sit collecting dust in my basement for over 6 years. Now, as you can see, today is going to be a different kind of service. Rather than your typical sermon, I'm going to be sharing my testimony. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Tracy Malloy, and I'm the small groups director here at Unite Community Church. And when I was first brought on staff, Pastor Chris had some onboarding with me, and there was something he said that really stuck with me. He said the most powerful thing in life we have are our stories. And a lot of times we're tempted to clean them up or wrap them up with a bow before we share them. But that's not what God intended. He wants us to share the authentic, messy versions that include the bad, the painful, and the ugly. And so I'm here to share with you mine, my journey of infertility, and the lessons that God taught me along the way. Now, God taught me 12 very specific lessons, but I'm only sharing 6 of them with you today. I do have a dream for the future to write them all in a book, but that's probably years down the line. But our first year trying to conceive, we were very passive about it. I was in college at the time. I went to college later in life, so it wasn't that big of a deal for us to get pregnant right away. But when the second year rolled around, this is when I started to become anxious, and I'm wanting to take control. Because according to the experts, after 1 year of trying, you should seek medical intervention. 6 months if you're in your 30s, which is where we were at. And an interesting thing about women is we are only born with a certain number of eggs. Let's say it's 1,000. You will never be able to get any more. And every single month we're losing them rapidly. And so they have a test that they can do to tell you where your reserve is at. And so I had this test done, and I knew for my age that my reserve was low. So I have this weighing on my mind. Now men, you guys on the other hand, you can reproduce like rabbits. Just ask Robert De Niro. I don't know what you want to do with that. That's just free information. Maybe you want to invest in a nursing home that has a daycare. Up to you. But the point is, I started to want to take control, and I started to try to do everything possible on my own to control. I read books the size of encyclopedias. I went on every diet on the market. I went to holistic doctors. I tried chiropractic care. I even did acupuncture. Now, you can fall asleep with 50 needles sticking out of your body. I mean, that's super fascinating. But I became so obsessed with trying to be in control that I became out of control. To the point where my husband comes home one day and every single plastic item that we own in the house, from plates, spoons, cups, Tupperware, was sitting on our island counter, and he opens the door and he's like, "What is happening?" And I'm like, "We are a glass-only family now." Even though they say it's BPA free, it doesn't mean it's BPA free. It leaches into your food. We cannot use plastic anymore. It's linked to infertility. I was that person. Point being, if there was anything within my control, I was trying to control it. And so that brought me to my very first lesson. We are not in control. God is. And so I want to ask you, are you trying to control your situations, or have you learned to surrender the outcome to God? And so now we're approaching our 3rd year of infertility. And I had always had an internal struggle between medicine and science. I read the story of Abraham and Sarah, and I wanted so bad to claim their story as my own. Scripture reads in Hebrews 11 through 12, "And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was unable to bear children because she had considered him faithful who made the promise." But I struggled because Sarah had an angel visit, right? An angel actually came to her and said, "Sarah, you're going to bear a child even though you're old." I didn't have that, right? So I'm struggling thinking, is me going to the doctors, like Sarah giving her husband to her handmaid because she didn't have enough faith. But I clung to the words in that passage, even Sarah. And I simply hoped that that could be my promise too. And so from that moment forward, we had claimed the word hope for our journey. And so here's just a quick picture. This is an ornament my husband and I bought with the word hope, just keeping it in the forefront of our journey. But I finally felt encouraged to take next steps when I talked to 2 women in this church, Kate Stiles and Tracy Pasek. And so here's some more free advice. Seek other wise Christians for help. But what they said really gave me peace. They said that we live in a broken world because of man's sin. And it's because of that brokenness that leads to death and disease and cancers. But that wasn't God's original design. And God has blessed our age with knowledge in the sciences and medicines. And so if I felt led to seek help from a doctor, it wasn't indicative of my lack of faith. And so I felt peace to move forward. And I finally called and made a consultation. And that's when I learned my second lesson. Hope is the basis of faith. Because our faith isn't measured by what we do, but by who we trust in. Because the reality was, it didn't really matter as much whether I chose IVF or whether I waited on God. What mattered was I trusting and hoping in God where I was at? And a lot of times we get hung up in these decisions, like do I go to Eastern, do I go to State? But what matters is, are you serving God and trusting and hoping in God where He has you? So I want to ask you, who is your hope truly in? Now it's year 3, and I'm 35 years old, and we decide to start the process for IVF. So I made the call to the fertility clinic to set up a consultation. This is when we reached our first roadblock. There was a 1-year wait list. I had no idea, but I went ahead, scheduled the appointment, and I'm thinking, this is it. I have been struggling for so long. Do I even go to the doctors? I finally decide I will. It's a year down the road. This is when God is going to move, and I'm going to get pregnant naturally in this 1-year wait time, and I will have an awesome testimony. Well, that did not happen. So a year passes, and we have our consultation, and then we reach our second major roadblock. I found a mass in my breast, which then turned to 5 masses, which turned to an ultrasound, mammogram, biopsies, and ultimately surgery. And I will never forget when I was having the biopsies done so that they could try to figure out what these were. The nurse looks down at me and she says, "I'm so sorry. You must be so scared." And all I can remember thinking as I'm laying there is, why is she telling me that? Like, why is she saying, "I'm sorry, you must be scared"? Like, if it was okay, like, why wouldn't she be saying, "I'm so sorry. I know you're scared, but it's probably nothing. It's probably this." And so when I get home that night, my mind just goes into a complete tailspin. And all I can think is, why did she say that to me? And then I let myself believe I'm going to have cancer and I'm going to have to go through chemotherapy. And I had a complete emotional breakdown because all I could think is I'm 36 years old. And by the time I get through all of that, I will never be a mom. I will never be able to have kids. And I was completely broken. Long story short, everything ended up being okay. And we finally got that behind us. Interesting thing, they actually put metal markers in your body, and that helps them determine what they've checked over and what's good. So I actually have a metal top hat. So I am a walking Monopoly board. You're welcome. So finally we have surgery. We have our consultation. All of that's behind us. We have a plan in place. We start some pre-tests that they make you do. They kind of make you go through the mill and testing. We're starting to get those out of the way. We're ready to begin IVF. It's early 2020. What do you guys remember about 2020? COVID. This is our third major setback. All fertility treatments were canceled by U of M until October of 2020. We were devastated. And then an IUI failed, and then we had another IUI fail, and then Adam and I got COVID, and then another IUI failed in January of 2021. And by this point, a year had passed from the time we had completed all of our pre-tests. And what I didn't know is they make you redo all of the pre-testing over again when a year has passed. I was completely devastated and so upset in that time. And so I'll never forget, I had to have this biopsy repeated for the 3rd time. And it's a very painful procedure. The only silver lining is that it takes less than 5 minutes to have this done, but it feels like an eternity because of how badly it hurts. And so in true hospital fashion, what do they do these days? "Do you mind if we send interns in?" For me? Oh my gosh, of course, because isn't that always our response? So I kid you not, these 6 Doogie Howser-looking interns come waddling in the room, packed in like sardines to watch this. And when the procedure begins, when the biopsy begins and I feel the pain, I had brought a stress ball because I'd been through this before and I knew what to expect. So my plan was to squeeze the ball when I felt the pain. And I could not help the emotions that came over me, but I had one of the biggest emotional meltdowns I had had since the beginning of my fertility process. I don't know what came over me, but all I remember thinking when I felt that pain is, God, why aren't you hearing my prayers? God, why are you making me go through this? I will be a good mom, and Adam would be a good dad. Why am I having to do this again? And I remember having so much anger towards U of M, thinking, I just feel like a number right now. I just feel like they want money for this procedure. Why are they making me do this again? And I'll never forget that experience because I'll never forget the look on those poor interns' faces. Their eyes were like saucers because they were probably told this is just a routine biopsy, and I completely had a meltdown. And I don't have time to go through everything we went through on our journey with U of M. But after 2 years, all of our fertility treatments had failed, and we never had any eggs successfully implant. We were left with nothing at the end of that process. And that leads me to my third and probably hardest lesson. God has a purpose for your pain. Because the reality is, never in a million years could I ever relate to another woman going through IVF had I not gone through it myself. Because until your heart is beating 100 miles a minute because you have less than 5 minutes to mix 2 vials of medication, and you don't know what you're doing because you have no nursing background, and you have to inject it in yourself with a 3-inch needle every single day, you can't possibly fathom how difficult this process is. From the changes the hormones have on your personality, to the emotional turmoil, to the fact that you spend 6 months preparing your body to accept an egg, only to have your body reject it. And to begin to put all of your hope into trusting IVF is the answer, it's the last straw because that's what the experts tell you. And you spend $35,000 without blinking an eye because of how badly you want to be a mom. And all you have are medical bills at the end of the process. You can't possibly understand what this process entails. And I guarantee any woman who had to go through fertility treatments or IVF is tearing up right now just having to relive those emotions. But God's purpose was for me to love her better. And so I want to ask you, what pain in your life does God want to use to show others his love? And so a couple in this church, Jim and Denise Miller, gave us a Christmas gift one year. What they didn't know is we had just implanted our last egg and it failed to take. So I was in a very dark and discouraged place. So a couple days later, I'm by myself one morning and I decide to open their gift. And this is what I see. It's a plaque with hope on it. And when I ran into Denise at church, she said it was just an old plaque. We had it lying around the house, but we knew that was your word for your journey. So we figured that you guys could use it more than we could. And so to Denise, that was just an old plaque. But to me, in that very moment, when I was starting to lose hope, when I was in a dark and discouraged place, it was God's whisper to me saying, I see your tears. I see your pain. I see that you're starting to lose hope, but don't lose hope in me. And after our IVF failure, we took some time to emotionally recover, and we decided that we were going to try IVF one last time. And this way we could look back and say that we did everything that we could. And so we decided that we were going to try it with a completely different clinic, and we chose CNY in New York. So it's now 2022, and I'm 37 years old. And we decided to go public and share the details of our journey this time around because I'm truly thinking in my heart, this is going to be our miracle story. And so I started taking the medications all over again. And we drove thousands of miles to Syracuse, New York, with the expectation of retrieving 5 eggs. And when I woke up from anesthesia, the nurse looks down and she says, I'm so sorry. We were only able to get 1 egg. And if anybody's ever been under anesthesia, you know you're super groggy during that process. And so I'm like, what did you just say? And she said, I'm so sorry. Like, we do not know what happened. We were only able to get one egg. The rest of your follicles were empty. This very rarely happens. And I just lost it, and I was sobbing on that table. And so my husband and I, we kind of just regrouped, cried it out, but we decided there's still one egg, right? This is our miracle egg. It only takes one. And so we kind of regathered our strength and energy and emotions, and we went to dinner at the hotel that night because I couldn't really do too much because the procedure is a little bit intense. But we go to dinner, and as we're eating, I'm not really feeling that well. I start to feel lightheaded. I feel a little bit nauseous. So I tell my husband, I'm going to go get some fresh air. So I go to step outside, and the next thing you know, I've got 4 heads looking over me. Are you okay? Well, apparently, I had fallen backwards into the door, passed out, and they had to call an ambulance. Well, we end up spending the night at a New York ER because, unbeknownst to me, they accidentally nicked me during the egg retrieval, and I was bleeding internally. Now, that happens in 0.004% of egg retrievals. And on top of that, I had developed a very rare side effect from the medication called OHSS, to where I couldn't even stand without passing out because my body was experiencing so much pain. And so we spend the night in the ER. We had a very unsuccessful egg retrieval, but we're still clinging to hope. And then we get the call the next day. Our one egg, our it only takes one egg, did not survive. And so we were completely broken in that moment because I'm thinking I took all of these medications over again. I drove all these miles. I went public with my journey so that God could get the glory. And we have nothing for the second time. And so my husband and I, we had 2 weeks off of work during that time because our plan was we were going to implant an egg. We didn't have any eggs to implant. But we had decided that we were just going to hit the road with our 2 weeks off, and we were just going to travel the U.S. and do our best to make happy memories out of a very sad experience. And when our treatment failed in New York, I had to answer the question, who is God to you, Tracy Malloy? Peter faced this question in Matthew 16:15. But what about you, he asked, who do you say I am? Job faced this question when he lost everything that he had, his health, his wealth, his children. And what I learned is it's not up to us to understand the whys. Scripture says in Proverbs 20:24, the Lord directs our steps, so why try to understand everything along the way? And Job wisely said, should I only accept good things from the hand of God and never anything bad? And so my 4th lesson was, everyone must answer at some point, who is God to you? And although I've been a Christian since I was 8 years old, I couldn't fully answer this until my 37th year of life, when I was learning He is a God of purpose, He is in control, and He is a God of hope. And so I want to ask you, who is God to you when the plans and expectations for your life don't go according to how you planned? And so our very first pit stop was a waterfall in New York. And so as we're walking down this mountain trail, we look to the right, and there are a wall of rocks with words written on them. And this one particular rock stood out above all of them, clear as day. And this is what we saw. It said hope on it. And I didn't know what that meant, but it stopped me dead in my tracks. And I grabbed my husband's hand, and we both just stood there and embraced. And I just hid it in my heart because I didn't know what God was going to do, but I knew deeply that even a life without children could be a life of value and purpose. And so during that period of my life, I was reading the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And the scripture says in Daniel 3:17, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you have set up. And in that verse, the two words that stuck out to me were even if. Because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they weren't afraid of the king or the consequences. Their only concern was obeying the Lord and providing a faithful witness for everybody that was watching them. They had done nothing wrong, and they knew that God could save them. God could intervene and save them. But they had decided in their hearts that even if he didn't, that they still were going to choose to do what was right, even if it cost them their lives. And so my fifth lesson is we can still praise God in the even ifs. Because not everybody who prays is going to be healed, but God will give you the strength to endure, and he will give us the ability to face death without fear. And so in that moment, I knew I wanted to have even if faith. Even if things don't go my way, I will trust and believe. I wanted faith as strong as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so I want to ask you, how strong is your faith in the even if moments of life? And so now it's our 6th year of infertility. And I had written a poem trying to verbalize what this journey and process feels like to help people who don't understand it. And I really didn't have any plans for it. I had just written it for myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to do something with it. And so I hired a videographer, and they helped me make a spoken word art piece. And so my only plan in that moment was I was going to play it today, Mother's Day 2023, without having children in the midst of our infertility. And so this poem that you're about to see, it was written in year 6 of our infertility. I wasn't pregnant when I wrote the poem, and I wasn't pregnant when we started filming for it. Every young woman has a premonition, her own Cinderella story, her dream, her vision. Since my childhood was broken, spent lost and apart, I grew a longing for a family deep in my heart. With a family of my own, I could right all the wrongs, make happy memories, replace sadness with song. Thinking my hourglass never would empty, that my prince, my family, my dreams would escape midnight's ticking. So when the time seemed perfect, it came as a surprise. There was never a baby, no crib, no cries. There's no little hand ever holding me tight. No hugs, no kisses, no bedtime goodnights. Now the cradle's still empty after 6 years of trying. A once exciting journey turned to anguish and crying. A feeling of loss, missing out and exclusion. Encountering motherhood only from an illusion. I can't scroll past a feed without reminiscing of all of those memories I seem to be missing. It's like a nightmare that never stops defeating. Every 30 days, the loss and failure repeating. Needles, chiropractors, holistic care, acupuncture, doctor visits, a nightmare. Failed IUIs, IVF, drugs, pills, leaves you empty, leaves you barren, leaves you drowning in bills. Endless advice from family and friends. Try this medicine, this diet, this book, this trend. Oh, it'll happen, don't stress. Why not adopt? Maybe it's not meant to be. Why not just accept fate and stop? Turns to sadness, turns to silence, turns to dead air. In your period of waiting, when silence seems deafening, look up and remember that God is still listening. The stars in the sky, they shine bright to remind us a nation was born from the womb of the childless. Even Sarah gave birth
To a child of nations, the stars in the sky reflect promised creation. Look up and let her story be your anthem of faith. Don't lose hope. Don't forget, Creator God is still great. For the hurting, the broken, the lost, and the lonely, God says to you, don't stop hoping. You can raise your fist clenched towards the heavens, but in the end, your fist will only open with reverence, saying, God is still good. Were it not for him, I don't know where I would be. His mercy never ends. Trusting God will use my story, every broken piece, every broken dream, all for his glory. For I know my Redeemer lives. I will trust in the Lord, because in the end, we are not of this world.
After our failure in New York, we got pregnant naturally 1 month later. And I believe the reason for that is God wanted to teach me my final lesson, and that is God is still in the miracle working business. And I needed to share my story and my poem with everybody today, that he was preparing well in advance. And so our baby boy was due in year 7, which would be the year of completion. And we are dedicating him today at our church. And so I want you to remember that God is in control. Hope is the basis of faith. There is purpose in pain. Everybody must answer at some point, who is God to you? And even if you can still praise him. And God is still in the miracle working business.